I'm very honoured to be able to speak about the formation of the college, which I consider to be one of the most significant advances in anaesthesia in Australia and New Zealand, certainly during my professional life. And I was lucky, I suppose, in some ways to be involved with such an important time. It's great to have David Scott with us today, who's the current president of the college, and Ralph Clark, who was the Dean of the Faculty in the late 60s. And myself, that means that the three directors of anaesthesia at St Vincent's Hospital have been leaders in the faculty or college. A unique achievement, and I'm claiming a world record of it. Faculty of Anaesthetists, Royal Australasian College of Surgeons, and our own college's bulletins, which I retained from about 1983 when I first joined the board of the faculty till the mid-90s. So the information has come from that source. And also from two other sources. Barry Baker wrote the history of the college and faculty some time ago, the 50 years celebration, and I learned from that Paul Keating said, for example, if you want to preserve your place in history, you have to write it yourself. So Barry's preserved in that, and reasonably so, I must say. But also his recollections are recorded in the recent publication of the college here, 25 years of leadership. So it's fairly objective. Now, just to give you some idea of how I was involved with the faculty and then college, I was elected in 1983 and was supported by Bill Crosby, who was one of my idols in those days. I was very young. I'd only 9 years since I gained my fellowship, and at the time I didn't realise this was a little bit early to get on the board of the faculty. Bill had noted my activities in continuing education for the Victorian Regional Committee, where we had quite a lot of success. So I was basically elected on the basis that I would continue that with the college, and I was involved for a year before I became a board member with the committee of the Continuing Education Committee. And among other things, I actually was the scientific convener for the two meetings in Melbourne in 1983 and 1989, and also for Hong Kong in 1984. And we did a lot of things in continuing education because I'd worked at the Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston in the mid-70s, and there was no doubt that continuing education in the USA was significantly better than what it was here in Australia, and we instituted a lot of those things. So I was very happy to be able to do that. It had a significant influence at the time. I became the treasurer in 1988 until 1992, and this was a period when we were saving to buy property, including this property, although at the time we didn't know it. And I had a reputation of being a rather stingy treasurer, which I thought was unfair because I was saving and they were spending. I always remember David McConnell wanting to come business class from Brisbane to Melbourne to meetings, and I knocked it on the head and I said, every dollar we save will be another brick for our new building. So even he responded to that. And around the time of the formation of the college, I became chairman of the executive and vice president, so heavily involved in the area at that time, and then president about a year after the formation of the college in 1993. And again, it's like a lot of things in life, you're just lucky to be in the right place at the right time. We finalised the purchase of this building and we renovated the place. We also had the first independent ASM in Launceston. And those two events to me were a very important components of the formation of the college, not just the legal formation where we published memorandums of association and became a legal entity. I also am very proud of the fact that I gave a seeding grant to John Rigg for his master trial. In those days, one of the few independent things you could do as presidents was you could award the research grants without consultation to the board. And I did this and then got a lot of criticism from the people from Western Australia at the time. However, the master trial became a template for multi-centre trials in Australia and New Zealand. And I think one of our great achievements in research for this college is the fact that we lead the world in multi-centre trials, not just Australia. And it started with Rajong. And also I managed to convince the board that we should have a communications consultant, not a public relations group, of which there were many in this Collins Street or wherever they hired, and obviously probably would cost us an absolute fortune. We decided to employ a person who had experience in media, and the idea was that he would understand what we did and we would get better understanding of using the media to promote our ideas. Now, as far as the formation is concerned, Barry Baker, and I should say that I actually sent all these slides to Barry to get his approval, and he did approve, saying they are factually correct. Nothing more. That's Barry, of course. He claims that there were informal discussions about the formation of a college starting in 1980. I personally don't recall this, but that's the way it was in those days. But it came to a head in 1988 when Ben Barry, who was president of the Australian Society of Anaesthetists, gave his Geoffrey K oration, and it's reported in Anaesthesia and Intensive Care, and he promoted the idea that anaesthesia in Australia needs a college. Now it's critical that you notice that that's Australia rather than Australia and New Zealand. Anyway, Barry somehow got involved with a financial dispute with the College of Surgeons, which I'll show you later, actually resulted in us forming our college. And he also wrote the first discussion paper in 1989 in response apparently to a meeting he'd been to with the ASA in Christchurch, I think it was, and he claimed there was a bit of a push for the Australian College of Anaesthetists, which the New Zealanders, you could imagine, were unhappy about. Now this is Ben Barry, who I worked with in the early years of continuing education. Ben I admired a great deal. He set up anaesthesia and intensive care, and was a tough job. I remember the first paper I had published in anaesthesia and intensive care required not one word of revision. And I thought, oh boy, this is good. But subsequently, of course, they got reviewed a bit more carefully. But his oration is well reported in anaesthesia and intensive care, and he promoted the idea of an Australian College of the Anaesthetists. Now, Barry wrote a Dean's message in 1989 at least, which was rather damning. He said, we have a problem with our prestige, inadequate prestige at least. Our status is too low, our image is poor, particularly amongst other medical specialties like the physicians and surgeons. Our contributions are misunderstood, our patients don't know who we are, and our place in life is not what we expected, and we expect for our efforts. A damning manifesto, as you'd agree, but I must say I personally like the idea of being rather anonymous, except occasionally a surgeon would appreciate your help, and then the odd patient would say, oh, you're the important person at the operation. Of course, I would totally agree with that assessment, and the patient got VIP treatment. But this is rather damning, and I think we all agreed we needed to do something about it. This is Barry in his heyday. And this is his discussion paper, which is a typical Barry Baker issue. He made it a one-page discussion. That meant that we all read it, because in those days we'd have about 3 inches of documents to read before a board meeting. And, you know, with all due respect, we just simply could not do it. So we definitely read one-page documents. I know you can't read it, but I'll show you the summary of it here. He basically, he thought that the positive sign of forming a college was to improve our image, to be independent of the College of Surgeons, and achieve financial independence, which I'll show you as a primary motivation a little later on. But it had cost us more for our physical facilities. The College of Surgeons definitely had influence, and we rode on their back to a certain extent to gain influence, and we may have lost it. We were concerned about New Zealand. New Zealand, despite everything, have really been very supportive of college, faculty and college activities over a long period of time, giving very good advice and so on. So we wanted to support them. Well, what was this financial dispute which precipitated everything? And Barry refers to it in one sentence, but it's a bit more complicated than that. Basically, what we did was we paid a proportional amount to the costs of running the headquarters in the RACS building in Spring Street. So that was something like the total number of fellows over the total number of members of the College of Surgeons, and it ran around 30% or maybe a little more or less depending on various aspects. And this income was raised from obviously from our members, our fellows, our trainees and our investments. And investments in those days, by the way, were pretty good. The College of Surgeons set up a foundation in 1979. And in 1982, Doug Joseph, the man on the wall over there, agreed to support it by encouraging donations to the RACS Foundation. And that, I think, was an error, because what happened was that the surgeons donated quite considerably to it, but the anaesthetists, in their typical fashion, did not. But we thought, or Barry thought at least, that we should get 1/3 of the College of Surgeons Foundation's money. Quite reasonable from our perspective. But you could see the surgeons didn't appreciate that at all. They thought, well, the surgeons donated most money, we should get most money. So it didn't occur, but Barry tells me it took him a year to get support for the idea it should be shared in the usual fashion, that is 1/3 to us, 2/3 to the surgeons. But there was other disadvantages. Michael Gorton, who was the College of Surgeons solicitor, gave us a legal opinion, and he had a really good relationship with Jones Shields, which was very beneficial, in fact, and he looked after our interests very well. But it turns out we had no legal standing. We therefore couldn't own any assets. So we had about 3.7 million worth of assets, which were technically, legally and so on, were College of Surgeons assets, not ours, which was an amazing oversight, I suppose, over a period of years. We'd already bought a couple of buildings with the College of Surgeons, one in Brisbane and one in Wellington, and thought that eventually these would be worth a lot of money. I'm not sure what ended up there. And the College of Surgeons in Spring Street was actually owned by the state government, and the College of Surgeons paid a peppercorn rent, which I presume was a guinea, but I'm not sure. And there was nothing to worry about. Now, Peter Livingston was the last dean and first college president. I think the driving force behind the formation of the college was definitely Barry Baker. He had the fortunate situation of being a dean for nearly 3 years. He followed the death of Robin Smallwood, and I think because he had more time than the normal 2 years, he got to understand the relationship between the surgeons and the faculty. And like myself too, I thought it had run its course and that we weren't really getting value for money, certainly in those late 80s at least. Now, Barry had actually been, I think he was supposed to be doing sabbatical leave at St Vincent's, but he spent all his time at the faculty getting to understand all this, so he had plenty of time to work out this financial relationship that we needed to work on. And then, of course, Peter came along and finished the formation off. He claims that we investigated incorporation in 1990 and produced memoranda and articles of association, which were sent to regional committees and fellows. And we were incorporated in 1991 and formed in February 1992, which is the reason for the 25th celebration. Here's Peter here. And this is a scan of his Dean's message, which includes the announcement that we were going to form a college. And with all due respect to Peter, it was in that middle paragraph there, and there are other things around it, not highlighted in any way, shape or form. There was a little highlight of it, you can't see it very well, but it's Internal Affairs, Australian and New Zealand College of Anaesthetists, Memorandum of Articles of Association. That was pretty much it. So we did expose ourselves for saying, well, the fellowship didn't know anything about this happening, the old story, failure to communicate. Whereas we had thought, we've been talking about it for 2 years, there's been plenty of time. We've informed the, informally I suppose, the regional committees, and certainly the President of the ASA would have been at all these meetings and known about it. So from our perspective, it was all 2 years old. And from my perspective personally, I just thought it was a no-brainer. Bob Hare claims that I voted against it at a regional of the formation of college, against it at a regional committee meeting. Well, my recollection is that I was overwhelmingly supportive of the formation, and I thought it was a no-brainer, which is a very big mistake to think that all the fellowship would support you. They don't if you don't tell them. For example, the amalgamation of the ASA and the college didn't really get adequate consideration. I think we'd have to plead guilty. The college had more of an educational role and standards of practice, whereas the ASA were more into the political and fees and industrial matters. And one of the problems with amalgamation would have we'd lose our tax-free status. Now, tax-free status is pretty important. So as an educational organisation, the college had tax-free status, whereas the ASA, I presume, paid some tax, even though they charge fees. Well, that was brought up at the time, so maybe it was wrong. We had some common functions, and this is where we competed, I think, a little bit too much. We had major meetings and so on, and also gave research grants. But I personally thought at the time that a little bit of competition doesn't hurt anybody. I think it made sure that we were both producing very good meetings and 2 a year meant that you could probably go to 1 at least. So, but one of the big things we were concerned about was the loss of New Zealand. So basically the ASA we really didn't pursue it vigorously, and maybe we should have. Not everybody was happy, as you could appreciate. Greg Deakin wrote a letter to the Bulletin. Greg was just asking Rod what his official function was. I think he was still mainly involved with the fees issue and did an excellent job in that area. He quite rightly expressed disappointment that the fellowship were only given 3 weeks to reply to our articles of memorandum of association that we had sent to them. And I think 3 weeks is pretty tough, but there was a view that we didn't want to enter into a long, drawn-out political situation where we might take several years to form our legal entity that would ensure that our assets were actually owned by the college. So he was concerned that the role of the college, the New Zealand involvement, and the relationship with the ASA hadn't been given adequate consideration, and I think I would plead a little bit guilty to that. Peter, however, replied that the main reason for the haste was to secure our assets. And I think that was right, because the College of Surgeons, as I'll show you, were going to buy the building at Spring Street, and they needed money. And really, legally, they had our money. The only thing about the legal formation of the college is that nothing much changed. And we still shared the headquarters with the College of Surgeons, and they tended to dominate our public image in that respect. We still had combined annual scientific meetings, and you've got to realise that they would have something like 10 different sections, and we looked like an extra section, which we didn't necessarily appreciate. And our attendance would be somewhere 100 to 150 fellows of the college, not very good. We still paid around about a third of the cost of the Melbourne headquarters, but probably didn't get the value out of that. And we had, however, secured the faculty finances around about 3.7 million. They were now ours and not the College of Surgeons. But I think two things that happened that I was heavily involved with that actually made the push to move significant, and therefore the continued formation of the college. The College of Surgeons wanted to buy the Melbourne headquarters, and they wanted more space. So guess what? We're occupying well, it wasn't a third of the space, it was probably about 10%, but that was going to solve that problem immediately. And I'll tell you about trying to buy the purchase. The Victorian government was almost bankrupt at that stage, and they would only sell government property at a commercial value, which you could imagine the surgeons didn't like to hear. And it was estimated that College of Surgeons would cost $55 million, so we were out of the equation immediately. And Bernard O'Brien, who was a microsurgeon at St Vincent's Hospital, who I again admired a great deal, he had two things that I enjoyed. One was that there was only no such thing as a meeting that lasted more than an hour, because he made all the decisions. And secondly, he had so many contacts that he knew how to negotiate, I tell you. And what he did, he found that there was a covenant on the site that the site could only be used for educational purposes. And this was very important because the site had been used for the old model school for about 80 years between 1857 and 1933, and then the College of Surgeons was built on that site. So he managed to negotiate the price down to 15 million, which the surgeons could afford, but 5 million was too much for us. So we had to move. Now this shows you the old model school. It was on the Spring Street site for 80 years. It was had a number of roles, but it was a teachers' college for a while, and also it was the first state secondary school in Victoria. It lasted until 1933, and the College of Surgeons was built in that site, finished about 1937. And you can see at that stage there were no wings and things like that that we had when we were there. So we had to find a new building, and what happened was that it lasted about 2 years. We were assisted by the Hooker Corporation, but the problem is we really had a specific requirement that they couldn't provide us, basically. Offices, library, museum, lecture theatre, exam centre and meeting rooms. It's very hard to find a building like that. We looked at a number of sites in Melbourne, and by the way, there wasn't much consideration to moving out of Melbourne. I always remember my brother lived in Canberra, and I said, oh, should we go to Canberra? And he said, oh, look, you only go to Canberra if you've got enough fellows in Canberra to do all the hack work. And there was 7 or 8 in Canberra, so thank God I didn't promote the idea of going to Canberra. So we looked at AFL House, which was near the MCG. You probably don't remember it, but it had rooms everywhere. And it was, we had a good look at that, but thank God we didn't go there. And we looked at an open building in Victoria Parade down from the Iron Ear, which was one just big space and would have been okay, but not very impressive. Then, of course, Ian Reckman, I'm sure he's listening to me. He was supposed to ring me up and make sure that I mentioned him. And so, listen, whoever sees Roon, tell him that I mentioned him. So Ian found Ulimaroa, advertised in the Age. I always remember this because I used to do some cardiac work at Epworth with Brian Buxton, and one of the great things about cardiac anaesthesia was when you went on bypass, you could go and have a break. And when I had a break at Epworth, guess who was there? Ian Reckman was always attacking me about some sort of college activity. But this time, he pulls out the ad for in the Age, and I said, oh boy, we should go and have a look at this. So wherever Ian goes, Mary comes with her, and we came together to inspect this building. And I remember having to nudge Ian because he was getting too excited about it. We both recognised this is possibly it. And I nudged him because if he got too excited, I could see the price going through the roof. Anyway, Ian found it. Okay, I accept it, but I paid for it. We did actually get outside in his car, I think, and I think we had a whoopee and said that was it. But we thought it again was pretty obvious this was it. Mike Hodson, who was the president at the time, needed quite a lot of persuasion, and eventually I really got onto him and said, look, you know, this is it, you've got to come over and have a look at it. He'd been reluctant because he'd inspected other sites which were appalling. So. But nevertheless, we finalised the purchase in 1993 during my presidency. It cost $1.462 million, not much more than the average house these days. And we had negotiated down from 1.8 million, which I was very surprised about that we saved, you know, 300,000 or so. But one of the critical things was that this site had a building approval for a 15-storey building at the rear of the property. So we knew that we could expand, because my view was that this place would last 10 to 15 years. It actually lasted 9 years, so I was a bit unhappy about that. And the renovations of the building cost about $600,000. It was a period of time when the building industry had collapsed, and there was very competitive in the building industry to do things of this nature. Now there's Ulimaroa, which it's hard to get a photograph it, so I think this came out of the age actually, but nevertheless it shows a wonderful building. There are only 5 of these mansions in St Kilda Road. I think there were originally something like 40 of them. So it's a very important building to have maintained in the way we have done so. It was actually built for a Wesleyan minister, Dr Watkin, in 1889, 1890. He was associated with Wesley College, but there was a depression in 1890, in the 1890s, again over real estate. And so he never lived here, and he rented it out to John Trail, who later purchased the building. John Trail was the chairman of a shipping line that used a steamer called Ulimaroa, which went between New Zealand and Australia. And that's why this building is called Ulimaroa. And one of his grandnephews, Dr Barrett, used this building as his general practitioner surgery for about 15 years. It was bought by and renovated by Repco in 1959, and they actually did renovate it very well using materials from other great mansions being knocked over, I think one in Kew. But then they sold it to a finance company and leased it back, which was one of the ways companies did things in those days. But the finance company didn't really look after the building at all. So it was a bit dilapidated when we saw it, but nevertheless we saw the potential of it. Now, one of my better decisions as president was to ask Joan Shields to stand down from her position as registrar or CEO of the college and supervise the renovations of these buildings. And those of you who remember Joan, she was a woman of great substance and she knew how to decorate, I can tell you. Despite my reputation as being a rather stingy treasurer, I said, now listen, Joan, we've been saving for a long time, go and spend it, which she did with great gusto. But we're not too bad though. We hired an interior designer, decorator, Murray Sheldrick. John Beaumont was the builder and Arnold O'Farrell the painter. And these three, one of the great things about Joan is she could always generate more from people than if you just let them go and do their own thing. They were really dedicated to restoring this building to its former splendour, and we were very pleased with that. And it's a great tribute to Joan that she was able to do that. It was quite a lot of work to be done on the building. And I did say to her that, look, you know, we're looking at doing these things and I expect it to last for 25 years, David. And there's been a recent renovation. I don't think much was done though, but anyway, it's lasted 25 years. So I'm pretty pleased with that. Great work for Joan. Now you can see the entrance hall, for example. This balustrade was painted white prior to us purchasing the building, and the painter, slowly got all the paint off and restored it to its beauty of oak or something like that wood. And the painter obviously did all this fancy painting, you know, not quite like Michelangelo, but pretty close. And Ralph Clark actually donated this desk. This was the President's office, not a very good photo of it. I'm sorry, it's a bit small, but that's where I worked for a couple of years. And I'm very pleased that with Ralph's generosity at that stage. And a lot of people gave things to the college because they were inspired by such a wonderful building. Here's the museum, great tribute to Rod to have set it up here. I think at the College of Surgeons was pretty averagely set up, if there's a reasonable term, but it had some fantastic things in it. And at least he had more of a home here. I'm not sure how many exhibits were able to be put in here, maybe about 300 or 400, but we had 5,000, I think. And I'm a little disappointed that we're really compressing the museum even further. It's such a great asset, and really some consideration should be expanding it and so on. This is the Doug Joseph room, which we're using now and was used for, I think, dinners and so forth. I always remember having a dinner for the College of Surgeons Council and being able to really show off the fact that this was much better than the College of Surgeons. I don't know whether they agreed, but you can remember, you should look out at the stained glass window on the other side here, which showed the college crest. This is the council room. It's a bit hard to see. It's quite a big room, beautifully furnished and so on. And Joan managed to find us a wonderful table that seated 20 people. And I think it was $20,000. It's probably worth $5,000 now. Nobody wants antiques anymore. And of course, Joan deserved a great surprise, prize, I suppose, to have a wonderful office for herself to work in, which she did, spent many, many hours in this area doing great jobs for us. At the opening, it was opened by the Governor-General Bill Hayden. I don't know, many of you would have been there. I was very pleased that we managed to get something like 300 fellows to attend the opening. I think people were surprised to see how eloquent this building was, and we had around 300 fellows. But more importantly, we were showing off to the presidents and their representatives from all of the other colleges, and this was by far the best building in those days. We had a scientific meeting, and the 9 professors of anaesthesia from Australia and New Zealand spoke. I don't know how many professors there are today, it's probably 30 or so, but 9 was a good number, and they gave a talk about their favourite subject. So it was a really, again, I think this was Ian Reckman's idea, so report back. We had a dinner at that night at the Arts Centre, again another very pleasant evening, and Brian Dwyer proposed the toast to the college. Now, these are the 9 professors of 1990s or 1994. John Gibbs, Colin Goodchild, Gary Phillips, Jeff Cutfield, Ken Hillman, Doug Jones, Bill Runciman, Duncan Blake, and the great Barry Baker. But it was really we're really celebrating academic anaesthesia at that stage, and I think that was a wonderful way of doing it. Here's a couple of photos of the area. Bill Hayden, he spoke very well. I'd written his speech, so it was pretty good. Made sure he said all the right things. Richard Walsh was with us, and it's Murray Seldrick, the interior decorator, did a wonderful job and was dedicated to the place. Doesn't show the crowd all that well, but that was one photo. And this is Brian Dwyer, who proposed the toast to the college. He did actually say to me, look, I'm going to actually say, why didn't you amalgamate with the ASA? And I said, well, whatever you want to say, you say it. He did it, but I don't think there was great applause for that aspect, but he did a good job otherwise. But the next most important thing that occurred in May of 1994 was our first independent ASM at Launceston. First time we'd been separate from the College of Surgeons for 40 odd years. Remember, I said to you that we looked just like another section of the College of Surgeons meeting, and there were probably 10 to 15 sections, so never got any great prominence. We used to get 100 to 150 registrants. This time we managed to get 400, and that was a huge advance on previous attendances. David tells me that in Brisbane there was 2,100 or something like that, so it's really grown enormously. And it was appropriate that we had it in Launceston, where William Pugh had given the first ether anaesthetic in 1847 in Australia. The visitors were Carl Hug, a cardiovascular anaesthetist, Jose Cavallo from Brazil, who was an obstetric anaesthetist, and Laurie Mather was a pharmacologist from Royal North Shore Hospital and I think the Australasian visitor. The College of Surgeons gave us a mace, which is a symbol of our power. Joan Shields had ensured that it was designed appropriately, and I don't know how much it cost, but I think it was around $30,000. So we're very pleased with the College of Surgeons giving us at least a little money. And the ASA gave us a portrait of Peter Livingston, and there was lots of other things given to the college at that time. It was very great to see such support for the college. We had our best publicity ever because we controlled our own publicity, and Eddie Dean, the publicist at the time, knew how to get the information into the press, television and radio, and you can see recently with all the information that comes out through the college, it's a fantastic effort. Now I think, as I said, although the 25 years celebrates the legal formation of the college, I think that the college formed over a period of years, and you could probably argue that it formed over 25 years. Yes, I agree with that. But nevertheless, these two events of Ulimaroa really made a big difference. I, for example, used to invite captains of industry, as we call them, to come here for drinks or whatever, and most of them accepted. They used to do the same thing at the College of Surgeons, but once they entered the building, they had a different attitude to us. They wanted to know more about anaesthesia because they realised that we were people of substance. So, and I think the Independent ASM resulted in more commitment of fellows to the college, a very important thing, because I think that was an issue at the time. And it definitely improved our public image, or started to improve our public image because of the publicity. So I think you'd agree that the formation of the college has been a great success. It contributed to where we are today, and if I looked at the Dean's message in 1989 and asked Barry Baker, what do you think about our current prestige? Well, very positive. Status, we've made it. We certainly have a great reputation amongst the other medical colleges now. I don't think we're misunderstood, and we've improved that by patients and other medical specialties. The patients do know a lot more about what we do. I don't know whether this is better, but I think we are satisfied with that, and we're certainly probably happy with our efforts. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you.